So have you ever found yourself in an argument where literally no matter what you said, nobody changed their mind? You go back and forth, you lay out these perfectly logical facts, you bring out all your absolute best points, and you just hit a total brick wall. Well, we have all been there, right? Whether it's this super high-stakes performance review with a coworker or, just a totally regular squabble at home over who left the dishes in the sink. Again, these stalled arguments are universally exhausting.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going on a journey together to unpack the hidden psychology of why our arguments stall out and exactly how we can fix them. We're going to be pulling directly from Charles Duhigg's fascinating research on supercommunicators, specifically looking at Chapter 5, Connecting Amid Conflict. Let's dive right in and see what we can uncover.
Okay, here is a quick roadmap of what we're covering today. First, we'll explore exactly why we stay in conflict. Then, the critical difference between surface and emotional conflicts. Third, we'll look at a real game changer of a technique called looping. Fourth, why sharing conversational control brings the temperature down. And finally, some incredibly concrete rules for having hard conversations.
All right, Section 1, Why We Stay in Conflict, looking at the high-stakes gun debate.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's look at an incredibly high-stakes experiment. The media company Advance Local actually brought sworn political enemies, fierce gun control and gun rights activists, into the exact same room in Washington, D.C. They wanted to see, could the right conversation actually overcome this bitter divide without turning into just pure rancor? To pull it off, they brought in experts like Sheila Heen from the Harvard Negotiation Project, and she discovered something profound. You see, our biggest mistake in any argument is assuming our goal is to achieve victory, to just defeat the other side. But actually, that's completely wrong. The real goal is figuring out why a conflict exists in the first place. Because most of the time, the combatants don't even understand why they're fighting. We get so wrapped up in winning the debate that we entirely miss the actual root of the dispute.
Section 2, Surface versus Emotional Conflicts, Uncovering the Hidden Fight. The first step to actually connecting during a conflict is realizing this. Every single fight you have is actually two totally different conflicts happening at the exact same time. On the surface, you've got this top-level practical fight. Imagine a couple arguing, and one says, "I want another child," and you don't. Well, that seems like a pretty straightforward logistical disagreement, right? But underneath that logistics debate is the emotional reality. The hidden fear that's actually driving the anger might be something more like, "I'm terrified another child is going to bankrupt us." Or maybe, "I'm frustrated because you're prioritizing a kid over my career." It's these underlying emotional conflicts that hold all the real anger and disappointment.
So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. If you don't acknowledge those underlying emotions, you are literally never going to understand what the fight is actually about. Researchers call this the "how do we feel" conversation. Just think about it. How can you compromise on the logistics of childcare if the real unspoken issue is that someone feels unvalued? You just can't. Without uncovering that deeper emotional layer, no amount of logical, sensible facts will ever lead to a compromise. You could argue about finances and schedules all day long, but if a deeper emotional need isn't being met, that conflict is just going to keep going indefinitely.
Section 3, The Power of Looping, the Mechanism for Connection.
So if we know that people naturally hide their emotions during a fight because they just don't feel safe, well, how do we fix that? We need a concrete, actionable technique to de-escalate things and create a safe space for people to actually open up emotionally. A lot of emotional intelligence just comes down to showing someone we have truly heard them. But in the middle of a fight, people are super skeptical, right? They're sitting there thinking, are you actually listening to me, or are you just formulating your rebuttal in your head? You can't just listen, you literally have to prove you are listening. And we do this through a beautifully simple 3-step framework called Looping for Understanding. Step 1, ask questions. Step 2, summarize what you heard in your own words. And step 3, ask if you got it right.
Now here's the real catch. This isn't just a one-and-done process. You ask your questions, you summarize, you ask if you got it right, and if they say, well, no, actually you missed this part, you loop again. You repeat this entire cycle until everyone totally agrees that you truly understand their perspective. In that DC experiment with the gun activists, the organizers had the participants practice this exact loop. They had to summarize their political opponents' views to those opponents' complete satisfaction. And guess what? By creating an environment where people had to actively prove they wanted to understand, it fostered incredible, deep trust, even among these really fierce political foes.
And we have the hard data to back this up. A study from 2020 found exactly this. Using techniques like looping at the very beginning of a conversation literally forestalls conflict escalation at the end. When you engage in this kind of active looping, you are viewed by the people around you as a better teammate, a better advisor, and just a much more desirable partner for any future collaboration. Proving you're listening completely disarms the defensiveness that usually derails our hardest conversations.
Section 4. Sharing conversational control. Lowering the temperature.
During any dispute, it is just deeply human to crave control. When we feel threatened, our natural, knee-jerk instinct is to control the situation, which usually means trying to force someone to listen to us. We think, if I can just make you see my point of view, you'll obviously agree that I'm right. But forcing someone to listen completely backfires. It inflames the battle and just builds massive resentment. On the flip side, proving you're listening by using a technique like looping actively shares the control. You are effectively handing them the steering wheel for a moment and letting them guide your understanding. That shared control brings the emotional temperature of the room down almost instantly.
But what happens when we completely lose that shared control? Well, when those same DC activists went home, they were invited into a private Facebook group with about 150 people, the vast majority of whom had not attended the training and hadn't learned how to loop. And as you might guess about an unmoderated Facebook group, it went exactly how you'd expect. Without those careful listening techniques and that shared conversational control, the group generated 15,000 heated posts in just 4 weeks. It just devolved into this messy, spiraling battle. It's a pretty stark warning, actually. Without these tools, our environments can turn toxic really, really fast.
Section 5. Rules for hard conversations. Let's get into some actionable takeaways. I want to make sure you walk away with highly pragmatic, real-world utility that you can take into both your in-person arguments and your online conflicts starting today. A vital rule for any hard conversation is to ask about others' feelings, and crucially, to share your own. Reciprocity in a conflict doesn't mean matching anger with anger. It means being emotionally available. If you want to bridge a massive divide, you really have to be willing to listen to what the other person needs, and then you have to be brave enough to reveal your own emotional reactions in return.
Let's rapidly break down these final, super actionable rules. When you are in a conflict, first, acknowledge understanding. Use that looping. Say, hey, let me just make sure I understand you here. Second, find specific points of agreement. Actually say out loud, I think you're right about, just to remind everyone that you want to be aligned. Third, temper your claims. Drop absolute phrases like everyone knows or you always do this. Instead, use softer words like somewhat or it might be. And finally, speak about specific experiences, not broad generalities. Say, I want to talk about why the dishes were left in the sink last night rather than you never do anything around the house. These simple, subtle adjustments create zones of agreement rather than zones of attack.
So, I want to leave you with this final question to think about. How will you use looping for understanding in the very next disagreement you face? Because the right conversation, handled the right way, doesn't just resolve a fight. It actually presents this incredible opportunity for deep, meaningful connection. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Now go get out there, start looping, and totally transform your next hard conversation.